Welcome to Soundtrack Your Life, a podcast about soundtracks, music, and movies. Each episode features a guest and focuses on a specific soundtrack and the personal stories connected to it. Now here's your host, Ryan Pack.
I'm Ryan Pack, and this is Soundtrack Your Life. We'd like to thank you for listening. You can follow us on Instagram at SoundtrackCast and on Twitter at Soundtrack_your. If you'd like to support us financially, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/soundtrackcast. Today, Brandis and I are being joined by Colin from Free with this month's issue. It's a podcast which releases an episode every month. They can be found on Instagram at Free with this month's issue and on Twitter at this month's issue. So welcome, Colin. Why don't you tell our listeners about Free with this month's issue?
All right, Ryan, thanks for having me. So Free with this month's issue is a podcast where me and my co-host Ian, plus a different guest each month, listen to a different old free CD from music magazines. Like in the UK, we used to get loads of these. I don't think they were as much of a thing in America, but basically we used to get a free sort of sampler compilation CD every now and again with magazines like Kerrang and Q and NME and Melody Maker. And it's where we heard a lot of the music that we grew up listening to because we didn't get it played on the radio so much. So, basically each month we sort of listen to them, and the best episodes are the ones where there's a nice mixture of songs that have held up well and songs that have aged horribly. So, we've got delights and horrors on the CD to sort of go through and rip into pieces, basically.
Speaking of which, today we're going to talk about the soundtrack to the 1994 Alex Proyas film The Crow.
Yes.
So why would you like to talk about The Crow today?
Well, I was amazed nobody else had ever picked it because it's the best soundtrack album of all time as far as I'm concerned. And a lot of people my age, I'm 40 now, so a lot of people around my age seem to agree. When there's a Facebook group that I'm in where it does like polls of the best album of all time, and the only soundtrack that they got in there was The Crow, and loads of people were there were people that didn't know the album so well going, well, this is a compilation album, why is this in there? And it's like, well, most of the songs were recorded specifically for the album, and it's just amazing. It's one of it introduced me to loads of bands that I ended up absolutely loving. It's got my favourite band, my favourite song by my favourite band ever, which isn't available anywhere else apart from on a B-sides compilation box set. And it's just utterly fantastic. As a sort of young teenage goth kid or metalhead, this CD was essential, and the movie as well. It's me and all my friends growing up absolutely loved this film and would watch it repeatedly throughout the late 90s.
Yeah, I never bought the soundtrack, but I remember having really good memories of the soundtrack, like the singles that came off of it. I remember really liking it. I'm not like a huge Stone Temple Pilots fan, but I was like, oh, this is a really good song.
Yeah.
And, everything that I remember hearing, I was like, oh, this is really good. And I wouldn't really consider myself like a goth person other than like really liking like, The Cure and, later in my life, Joy Division. But I feel like the bands that you all know who are on the soundtrack, like I feel like they all brought like really solid tracks.
Yeah, definitely. It's a film that we were all absolutely obsessed with at school. There was I grew up in a sort of somewhere between a village and a town called Polesworth, and basically we'd on the way home from school, halfway home, there was this little tiny video shop called Video Scene 2. We didn't have like a big blockbuster or anything like that, and we used to pop in there on the way home, and they used to sell all the old posters that they'd finished with, and I had the advertising poster for The Crow bought from Video Scene 2 on my wall for probably about maybe 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, this was definitely like a huge moment with me in high school and my high school friends as well. Like, definitely
Yeah.
one of like the top movies. Like, you had The Matrix, you had Equilibrium, and you had The Crow. Those were probably like the top three must watch, must talk about, must brag about you being a fan. It's kind of like a status thing, right?
the leather trench coat movies.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, well, like, you're not cool if you don't like these movies sort of situation. And
Oh, we weren't cool. We just, we were looking back on it, but nobody else thought we were.
well, I mean, it's all about state of mind, right? Like, you think you're cool,
Yeah.
you're cool. But yeah, no, like, I definitely remember that. And I remember having seen it a lot of times in that era of my life, like in high school, but I hadn't seen it since then. And so I rewatched it and I was just like, oh man, this movie does not hold up. It doesn't, like, serve justice to like the memory that I have of it as, like a kid growing up. But
Yeah.
it's unique because the soundtrack itself, like if you take the soundtrack out of the movie, that obviously still holds up. Like you're saying, like really great songs. A lot of
Yeah.
the bands involved were huge fans of the comic book. And that really shows in sort of their song selection and the fact that they re-recorded all of their songs, I'm guessing for budget reasons, to make this soundtrack happen on a lower budget. But in the film, I mean, again, it's like, it's a product of its era. It's 1994. It has that definite 90s cheesy, we're making a movie or are we making a music video situation happening. And it's just interesting. The soundtrack by itself is great, but the songs put into the movie are just a little bit of like a record scratch. Like they're not seamlessly like mixed into the film, and it's weird because it's just an interesting situation. Usually, if you have a really great soundtrack, it's used really well in the movie. But I don't know, it's weird. It's like I did not like how these songs, no matter how much I love the songs and like the curation of them, I didn't like how they were used in the film. And so I have mixed feelings. But definitely me as a high schooler, me as a kid was like all about the movie, all about the music and the soundtracks, like was not thinking about, the stuff that I'm thinking about now as an adult.
Like, I don't remember how big the comic book was. I feel like it was kind of still, an independent, kind of more underground sort of thing where, I kind of just knew like the major Marvel and DC players. So for me, it was a huge surprise that they were able to get so many people, that were big names to be on the soundtrack, because I kind of felt like it was, a very like unproven sort of thing. One of the soundtrack supervisors also did the Batman Forever soundtrack, and with Batman, it's like, yeah, sure, we're going to get U2 and we're going to get Smashing Pumpkins and all. That makes sense because everyone knows Batman. But for this kind of unknown comic book with an unknown lead actor who is only known as Bruce Lee's son at the time, it's crazy that you have The Cure and Stone Temple Pilots and Nine Inch Nails and Rage Against the Machine. Like, there's a lot of huge names, and that's why it debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Top 200 and sold almost 4 million copies.
I think part of how the bands got involved with it was they were almost sort of summoned by James O'Barr, who wrote I think he wrote and illustrated the comic, because he's the only credit on there, on the version that I've got of it anyway. So yeah, obviously not, like you said, not as well known as the Marvel and DC stuff, or even like Image Comics and stuff like Spawn. It wasn't as well known as, but I think the bands like The Cure and New Order will have known because their lyrics are referenced in the comic. So there's the reason that Robert Smith was aware of it and why The Cure got involved was there is a page where the entire lyrics of The Hanging Garden by The Cure are basically the text on that page. And originally that's what they wanted in the film. And then Robert Smith said, no, I'll write you a new one, and wrote Burn. And I'm really glad he did, because it's my favourite. I mean, The Cure are my favourite band, and it's my favourite song by The Cure. So very glad he did that.
The irony.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like that's what I was saying. Like with it really shows that these bands like really cared because it was an independent comic. You know, it didn't have
Yeah,
the big money behind like with the Marvel DC situation, but it was almost like an underground immediate hit because I believe the comic was late 80s and this was 1994. So it hadn't even
yeah,
been out or around a long time, you know, to kind of have that sort of like, you know, oldie but goodie cult status
yeah.
behind it.
It's not going to be one that the bands had grown up with. It's one that they would have maybe read
Right.
while they were on tour.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
I think it was 88 or 89. I think you're right.
Yeah, it just had this like instant like hit following, and unfortunately, sadly, it was influenced by like you know the creator's own personal tragedy. His
Yeah,
wife died, I believe, in like a drunk driving, like a drunk driver hit them, and she
yeah,
died, and so that's what like influenced it. So I've never read the comic personally, but I'm guessing there's a lot of because it's based on personal tragedy and real story. There's a lot of really like intimate and real and raw feelings in there that
yeah.
probably resonated with a lot of people.
Yeah, the comic's not amazing. There are much better comics. It's good source material,
Hmm.
and you can tell that they built on it a lot for the film. But yeah, so the difference in the main difference between the comic and the movie is the way that Eric and Shelley are killed in the comic.
Hmm.
Is they're basically crashed into by um, the gang while they're just out messing about, and then they murder them in the process of they've crashed and they're all drunk and messing about and stuff. So they decide to kill them. Whereas in the film, they've actually got a bit more of a motive. So it's they're clearing the house out because they need to clear this building because Top Dollar, who's the boss of the gang, he's like a sort of crime kingpin, and he's sold the building and needs to get all the tenants out. So there's a bit more of a motive of it for why in the film.
Yeah. Yeah. Fleshing that out a little bit. But
Yeah,
like you said, it's great source material. And so it clearly resonated with the bands because, I mean, even though if you look at the metadata for like the soundtrack, it doesn't say that most of them are original songs or like bespoke re recordings and covers. Some of the songs that are credited as, you know, like on other albums and used for this soundtrack were actually still written for it. Like, for example, um, I totally just like spaced. Oh, Jesus and Mary Chain Snake Driver. Like if you look at
yeah.
it
It's
on the
on
sound,
the best of record, I think, that came out a couple of weeks before. But yeah, it was written
yeah,
for the Crow.
exactly. So it's like that, even though it's not credited as like an original song, it is still was actually like an original song. And all of those
Yeah,
bands were like re-recorded songs that they already had and like changed the title. Again, I'm guessing it was for budgetary reasons. And it's just insane because usually with soundtracks, you know, it's like there's a curation of music and bands, you know, like agree to like those songs being used. But I would, what, like 75, 80% of the soundtrack is like specifically created for this movie. And I think that that speaks volumes.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, and they're nearly all. In quite a lot of cases, it's the best songs that the band ever did. Not in all cases, obviously. Nine Inch Nails have done. I mean, Dead Souls is amazing, but they've got other amazing songs as well. But
Yeah.
bands like the lesser bands on there, like For Love Not Lisa and um, Medicine, they're definitely their better songs from the other ones that I've listened to. It's like,
Mhm.
yeah, I'm not going to investigate these that much further.
Yeah, I was gonna say Nine Inch Nails. Like you said, The Cure is your favorite band. Nine Inch Nails is my favorite band, and so
Yeah,
I mean, consequently of us doing this podcast, I've had Dead Soul stuck in my head all this morning. Thanks for that.
yeah.
But it's definitely
Nine Inch Nails are about equal with The Cure and Mogwai as my three favourite
yeah.
bands.
Oh, I love
Yeah,
Mogwai.
it's an interesting choice for them. I mean, like they, you know, it's a good song and it shows up on the deluxe re-release of Downward Spiral, and that's
Yeah,
you know one of fans' favorite albums for sure. But for me, it always kind of stood out. Like you can tell it's a cover. It fits with you know like Nine Inch Nails, but it's not. You can tell it's not a Nine Inch Nails song. It's just a very different like sound for them, and so you know for me, you know, it's like I like Nine Inch Nails for a reason, and so it's never really stuck out as like one of my favorites of theirs.
I love it, but it got me into Joy. It's one of the things that introduced me to Joy Division. My my co-host Ian, me and him used to DJ at a club night that nobody ever used to turn up to. It was basically a Monday night in our local rock pub, and it was basically me, him, and another guy DJing, and the other guy's brother playing pool, and that was everybody that was in there. Unsurprisingly, we didn't get paid, but basically we could just listen to whatever music we liked over a big PA system. But I can remember really vividly buying Substance, there's a New Order Substance and a Joy Division Substance. The Joy Division version of Substance, which is it's sort of a compilation-ish greatest hits, but not quite. It's got a lot of really early stuff on there, and that's got Dead Souls on it. And I can remember playing that to Ian and him going, well, it's just the same, but with not as good vocals, basically. But I love Ian Curtis's vocals as well, so I didn't agree with him at the time, but I can see where he was coming from. I'd been lucky enough to see Nine Inch Nails do it live as well, which was great. When they played Reading Festival in 2007, they played this and Burn in the set list. So they were basically, obviously, in a soundtracky kind of mood.
I think that would have been pretty close to when Social Network came out, so maybe that was on Trent's mind.
Possibly, yeah. Yeah, I can't remember what year that was. I think it was...
Oh, no, sorry. That's 4 years off. Sorry. I'm like skipping over like 4 years there. So not quite.
This would have been, this was year zero sort of era.
Yeah.
Because they played loads of, like Great Destroyer was amazing.
Yeah, the Social Network and all that stuff was like right after that. It's like when he was making that like shift.
Yeah, it was while they were on sort of hiatus, wasn't it?
Yeah, but they like released Ghosts, and I think that was kind of like a little bit of a bridge. I mean, it wasn't his first like, original score like sort of like situation, but it was definitely his first commercial original score. So I think that was his little bit of a hiatus and instrumental and like, oh, I should get back to scoring. But it's interesting because Joy Division / New Order was actually supposed to contribute a song to the soundtrack, but it didn't work out. And so that's what led to Nine Inch Nails covering Dead Souls. But apparently Nine Inch Nails was also supposed to perform in the movie. When you see the other band whose name is escaping me now, they're performing like in that sort of
there's two scenes. You've got My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult are in there towards the end, and you've also got Medicine playing there as well. So weirdly, you've got on the soundtrack album, you've got Time Baby 3 by Medicine, which is the track that they did with, it's just got Robin Guthrie on the credit, but Liz Fraser's on there as well. So it is the Cocteau Twins joining them. But it's actually Time Baby 2 that they play in the actual film, which is exactly the same song. It just doesn't have the Cocteau Twins on it. So isn't as good because Liz Fraser is amazing. But yeah, I was thinking about that. The 90s was an absolutely brilliant time for movies to have just a scene where there's a rock band playing and there's just people in a club at some point and, you've got the band playing live. Because I was trying to remember as many as I could, but you got Cannibal Corpse in Ace Ventura Pet Detective, L7 in Serial Mom, White Zombie in Airheads, which is amazing, Real Big Fish in Basketball, Primus in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, Mighty Mighty Boss Tones in Clueless, The Offspring in Idle Hands, where Dexter then gets the top of his head cut off, and Soundgarden and Alice in Chains in Singles as well. So it's a nice 90s tradition that doesn't seem to happen anymore. People need to bring that back.
I guess it's scheduling and money, and everyone's like, it's way easier to just pay an extra to look cool playing a guitar.
Yeah, no, I bet you'd get plenty of bands that would do it for just to have their song in there. You would that'd be if you're paying an extra, you've got to get someone to write the song, then people to mime it. Whereas if you've got the actual band that have written the song playing in there, they'll probably do that for free. For if they've already got the soundtrack money, they'll be probably quite happy to appear in the film. I would.
I mean, it's a little bit of a boost, so yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was trying to imagine.
People aren't making music videos anymore, so it's like the next best thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're swinging back to that. Now we have, what is it, like a visual album or something? And I'm like, you mean a music video? You're like reinventing something that already exists.
Well, that's when they do ones for every single song, which you used to get occasionally. The first Garbage record, they did videos for every song and put a version out on VHS.
I miss that. I miss just having like, a channel where you could just turn on and like watch music videos. It's the perfect sort of like background. It's interesting. You don't really have to pay attention.
But you've got to search for them, and it's called YouTube. But I do that every evening. I'll watch a load of music videos on YouTube and just see what comes up next.
Yeah, I was trying to imagine how none of the movie would be different, but just like in a parallel universe where Nine Inch Nails actually was like performing in that cameo film, and I was trying to feel how I would feel about it, and I'm still not sure about it.
No, I think it would work well. It wouldn't be as much for parallel universe as the original idea for the film. Have you heard about what the movie studio's original pitch to James O'Barr was?
No.
Okay, so originally, when they came to James O'Barr and said, okay, we want the rights to the film, we want to make a musical starring Michael Jackson of The Crow.
Oh my God.
Slightly different tonally.
A little bit. A little.
I mean, it could be amazing.
That would not have aged well.
No. That would not have aged well for many reasons, but I just can't even picture that.
So me and Ian also do another podcast called We Dig Music, and we did an episode years ago on Michael Jackson. And one of the things that I did for the research in that is I watched Moonwalker, which was the movie that he made in the late 80s, and it's completely insane. There's a section where he's being chased by a load of gangsters, so runs up an alley, turns into a car and escapes. As in, like a transformer, Michael Jackson becomes a car.
As one
Sounds
does.
about right. In the 80s, he could do anything.
He had the budget to do that kind of thing, absolutely.
I mean, I think his video for Scream, the song that he did with his sister, I think it was like $7 million.
Yeah, it was the most expensive video at that point. I think it's been surpassed since then, but yeah, it was ridiculous. And that was not much later than The Crow, was it? I think that was about 96, 97-ish.
Yeah.
Mainly because I remember the same school friend that I used to watch The Crow with loads. He had the Michael Jackson History, Past, Present and Future record when it came out.
You could either make The Crow for $23 million or you could make Michael Jackson's Scream video for $7 million.
I mean, less people got injured on the Scream video as far as I'm aware.
I don't think the Scream video has inspired years of wrestling storylines.
I'm not much up on wrestling storylines, but I know that it was Sting, wasn't it, whose makeup was totally ripped off from The Crow.
Yep, trench coat, the makeup.
Yeah.
And then he would just pop. He would literally come down from the rafters on like a string, and then just like beat people with a baseball bat, and that would be the end of things.
He didn't, stab 26 knives into somebody in all of their organs in alphabetical order. Then
that was one of my favorite lines. But I was like, "But how do you know it was in alphabetical order? Do you have a witness?" Like,
it would involve a level of surgical knowledge that I don't think a rock star who lived in a loft apartment would have. Fairly certain he wasn't a trained surgeon.
Well,
a coroner is probably not going to go through all the work of like, okay, this stab wound was 5 minutes before this other stab wound.
That's what I want to know.
It's not the stab wounds; they're in alphabetical order.
Brandon Lee got a ton of magical abilities when he was resurrected, like when his character was resurrected. He wasn't, like a street fighter. He wasn't able to catch knives and throw knives. So I can believe that hand waving, but
Yeah,
how does
okay.
Garner know? You know what I mean? Like the time of death was somewhere in the middle of that.
It's going to be, and also they said that within probably about 3 hours in actual time of when it had happened, because
Yeah.
it all takes place over one night, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a very quick autopsy.
Yeah. But I really love that line though.
Yeah,
That and when the asshole detective is harassing the beat cop or whatever, and he's like, "Well, what do you call that?" and points to the crow on the wall, and the cop is like, "Call that blood."
yeah. The detective, sorry, not the detective, the beat cop, played by Winston Zeddemore from Ghostbusters.
Hmm.
It's the
Yeah,
only non Ghostbusters film I've ever seen him in.
I had completely forgotten about that, and so yeah, when I rewatched it for this podcast, I was like, "Holy shit, he's in this! He's the beat cop! Oh my god!"
Yeah, Ernie Hudson, isn't it?
My favorite line in the film is when Eric shows up at his apartment and he's in just like a wife beater tank top and his boxers. And
Yeah.
Eric goes, "You're still wearing your hat."
It's because he's got to they've got to show that he's a cop. It's brilliant. The other, I think probably my favourite line is the bit where it's towards the start, and he says it's when he's first seen Eric Draven, and he says something about you know I've got to sit around here dealing with a fucking mime, and then he disappears, and he says, "Well, at least he didn't do that walking in the wind shit,"
Yeah,
which is
there's
great.
some really great lines in dialogue in this film that do hold up, even if a lot of the other filmmaking qualities do not.
I think there are much worse films, such
Oh,
as
well,
the Crow City of Angels. The sequel is I don't know why I never watched it at the time, but last night I decided to do a double bill and watch both. And The Crow is, while yes, there are much better films since then and before then. There are a lot of films that I like a lot more, although I've still got obviously a lot of time for it. I only watched half of The Crow City of Angels. It's got it's got some brilliant stuff on the soundtrack, but it's such a bad film. I was really disappointed as well because it's directed by Tim Pope, who basically he's done most of the Cure's videos, and he's
Right.
like directed their live movies and stuff. But obviously, when it turns to him doing an action movie, it's not so good. It's all filmed with like this really weird sort of yellow haze, which I think is supposed to be like the smog in LA because it's the city of angels. But it didn't. I've been to LA and it wasn't all like somebody had put a smoke machine with yellow dye all
thank
over
you.
the place.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's not that bad, guys.
it was all right. I liked it. There's some nice bits.
Yeah, no. I mean, I know again we're talking about like the soundtrack here, but I can't not talk about the actual score.
Yeah,
It's interesting because, like I said, the soundtrack as a standalone by itself, really amazing. When those songs are used in the movie, it's a little jarring because they're not, sort of like mixed in well with the edit. But the score is like, what is happening? The tone of it does not match any of the scenes. When you have this like weird Hollywood jazz moments, these new age moments when this really dramatic stuff is happening and you're just like, I don't even follow what's happening right now.
there's one sort of theme bit that sort of is like a recurring thing that's all right, but yeah, the rest of it is it's just sort of weird incidental music, isn't it? And they actually put out a score album a few years ago on vinyl, and I saw loads of people getting really excited about it. It's like I don't know if they realised that it's not the soundtrack, it's the score. It's not going to be what you're expecting it. I did get it on vinyl for Record Store Day about 3 or 4 years ago, I think it was. So yeah, I've owned the soundtrack album I've owned it on cassette, CD, and vinyl. So collected the full set there.
Full set. Yeah,
Don't
I
think it
mean,
was
I
ever
don't know.
released on eight track cartridge, and we didn't have those over here much anyway.
I mean, I don't know that the score is necessarily bad as a standalone either. I've never like listened to it in and of itself. It just doesn't match the movie at all. It's
Yeah.
very weird. It's like whoever did the score was not watching the film and had not seen the film or read the script or read the comic when they were making that music.
Well, what's funny is the guy who scored it, his name is Graham Revell.
Yeah.
He is known for just doing movies that are like this. He does like a lot of horror and a lot of like dark action movies. So he's done Idle Hands and Tank Girl and
Yeah.
Strange Days and a lot of movies that you would feel like would be, these movies make sense as far as like sharing a composer. Like, oh yeah, they probably have like the same sort of vibe.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's weird that like people keep going back to him when like maybe this isn't like the most profound score that he's done.
I mean, maybe again, like we're looking through the lens of like modern day versus, like in the 90s,
Yeah.
jazz and rage were like the thing. So maybe it was just such a popular, genre in that time that you didn't mind that it like didn't match the tone of the film. But watching it today, you're just like, wow, the tone of the soundtrack totally matches. It just wasn't mixed in well with the editing, but the score is just like a totally its own thing.
I'd say I've never had any issues with how it's mixed in with the editing. The bits that bug me about all stuff that's edited for TV and film is when they cut bits of a line or bits of a song, which they do with The Cure, Burn.
Mhm.
That's the scene where he's sort of putting the makeup on for the first time and like becoming the Crow, which actually isn't Brandon Lee. That was a bit that was shot after he died.
Mhm.
So the bits in the mirror is a digital composite of his face from other scenes, and which is why it's shown in the only bit you see his face properly there is in a smashed mirror reflection because they could do it easier that way. But in that bit, there's a few bits where it skips like about 3 lines or something, and because I know the song so well, it's just like ah, and whenever I hear a song in anything like on TV or a film, and they skip bits like that, I always find it really jarring. But that's because I'm more of a music person than a film person, really.
Yeah, no, I don't think there are very few situations where I feel like that's necessary. So I find that very jarring as well.
Yeah,
But also, and I think it's in that scene or maybe a little bit earlier, they're playing a song and they're cutting in and out of the song, even though it's not playing in the scene. It's just, for our benefit. But when they're cutting out to like the gang sort of like doing their thing, the music stops playing. And it's like, well, but Brandon Lee's character's not listening to the music. So why are we cutting in and out of it in this sort of like montage? It's weird how they're like jumping in and out. And then it's like they're not playing a song. And then all of a sudden the song like comes in very abruptly. Like it's not like it's faded in or it's not like it comes in when you're cutting from one scene to another. So it makes sense. It just kind of like appears. And I think
is that the bit where it's
that
is that the bit where he's running across the rooftops to Dead Souls? Because I think that does sort of just like burst in rather than fading in or anything. But I don't
yeah,
think it swaps to other scenes in
yeah.
between.
So like
I
the
don't remember it
song
doing that.
right before that is where it just like it comes in immediately, and then like Dead Souls comes in immediately, and then I believe the song after that, it was just like the use of 3 songs in a row was like, wow, I was not
Right.
here for how they introduced that song into the scene. Again, it's like, the tone of the song totally matches what's happening. It's just how it's
Yeah,
mixed in.
definitely.
It's jarring
Yeah.
for me.
I wonder how much that has to do with like how much they had to like reshoot and kind of reconfigure the movie because Brandon Lee passed away in the middle of filming it. Because I believe that there was supposed to be like a narrator in the movie, and they had to cut that stuff out, and
There
like
was there was a complete different character that was so there's a he's called the Skull Cowboy, and yeah, he's basically in there for exposition, so he's in there to sort of explain a little bit about what's happening. But I think they replaced a lot of that with Sarah's like monologue and that kind of thing at the start, where she explains about, sometimes when somebody dies and there's unfinished business, a crow brings them back and all that rubbish.
Yeah.
I think it's an editing choice that was very 90s music video and just does not hold up for a
Yeah,
feature film.
yeah.
Yeah, it bugs me whenever they cut to like slow motion for like no reason.
there's a spoof sort of horror comedy thing series called Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, which is fairly obscure even in the UK, but it's got a load of people that had turned up in like Mighty Boosh and stuff like that. But it's basically like it's it's supposed to be like a really badly written Stephen King type sci-fi horror series set in a hospital, and there's loads of bits where it's cutaways to like the cast and people like that talking about it. And there's a bit where they're talking about we used a lot of slow motion to save money. Basically, anytime it was when they needed to fill up time, they would make a scene slow motion. And sometimes there was one episode that in the 30 minutes, up to 9 minutes of it were in slow motion. So perhaps that was a kind of thing to fill out the time. And it's weird, very sort of jerky 90s slow mo, where it's almost like freeze frames as well that they use in it, particularly right at the end where Sarah's in the graveyard going up to the crow to get the ring. It's doing this sort of like almost stop-start slow motion thing that's really, really weird.
I'm not sure what the budget was for this film. Again, I'm guessing it was a little bit on the lower end based on how all of the songs were re-recorded instead of using the originals. But that also would speak to a lower budget of we're going to take this shot that we already filmed at a normal frame rate and slow it down versus purposefully filming it at like a different frame rate to use for slow motion. So yeah, it speaks to like what you just said with the spoof thing of like, oh, we need to fill a little bit of time. Let's just slow this shot down, and it wasn't shot for that at the right frame
Yeah.
rate.
I don't know about the re-recordings being for budgetary reasons, because they could have they could have afforded to have New Order on there if New Order had the time. It was just that they didn't have the time to re-record an old Joy Division song.
Yeah, I don't mean the covers. I mean the other songs by the actual bands. A lot of them they re-recorded their own music and changed the title.
Yeah,
Yeah, like
well,
Rage Against the Machine.
yeah, no, that one will be because the original version of Darkness of Greed, which is the full title of it, so it was just changed to Darkness, it was their demo. So it would have sounded really, really thin next to all the rest of it. So that's why they would have re-recorded it. I've listened to both versions and they're great, but it would be, it was recorded before they were signed in a demo studio rather than a proper Epic Recordings budget studio. It was the B-side to Killing in the Net, which I don't think was released as a single with B-sides outside of Europe. I think it was just the UK and Europe that had that on there. And also, Zach De La Rocha's pre-Rage Against the Machine band, Inside Out, used the lyrics on one of their songs as well, but it's totally different musically. But yeah, I absolutely love Darkness. It's the sort of fretless jazz bass type stuff on there. It's great.
Yeah, there are a few other songs too that like were re-recorded, and so like I totally get that if it's like an earlier version or you're changing like band members or something. It happened on so many of these songs that was like a little bit suspicious to me, but maybe I'm totally wrong. I work in advertising, I work in licensing, so that's just the first thing that like pings to me
Yeah.
is.
Well, Stone Temple Pilots had to re-record, or they had to give a different song because they had re-recorded a song called "Only Dying," and because
Yes.
Brandon Lee died during production, they realized that would be in poor taste. So
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
why they got the Big Empty, anyways, which actually like really blew up on this soundtrack.
It's Big Empty's a much better song than Only Dying as well, because they put out Only Dying. They put out on the deluxe version of their debut record a few I think it was probably about 10 years ago now. And I've listened to it just after listening to Big Empty, and it's not good. I mean, Stone Temple Pilots, I'm not the biggest fan of, but their second record, Purple, which is the one that Big Empty is on. So this was it was written for. I don't know if it was written for the Crow, but it was one that they went, okay, we can't use Only Dying, let's put this one out. They hadn't released the second album yet, so it was
Right.
still exclusive to this for a while, and then got put on the new album.
Yeah, I think the timeline was they released this on the soundtrack, and then they recorded an unplugged episode where they also played it.
Yeah,
and I really like the unplugged version because like you can really hear the musicianship. Because they still kind of have that like first album like sort of like chorus distortion on the chorus. So I kind of like it more stripped down. But yeah, I'm with you. Like, I'm not a huge Stone Temple Pilots fan, but I'm like, oh, this is actually a really good song. Like, I like this song from them. It kind of stopped people complaining about them as just sounding like Pearl Jam karaoke.
Yeah. I was just going to say, anybody that does describe themselves as a really big Temple Pilots fan probably should be treated with suspicion.
I've never heard that, but I absolutely love that Pearl Jam karaoke. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the only Stone Temple Pilot song that I like. And then on the second Crow soundtrack, Jurassital is like the only Filter song that I like.
Oh, Hey Man, Nice Shot's good. But other than that, and what's the Filter track on the Spawn soundtrack? That's really good.
Oh yeah, that's also good. I only like Filter on soundtracks.
Yeah, no, I can dig that. The Crow City of Angels, terrible film, but is really good soundtrack. It's got there's like Gold Dust Woman by Hole is absolutely brilliant Fleetwood Mac cover.
Yep.
You got I'm Your Boogeyman by White Zombie. Bush doing Bush's turn to do the Joy Division cover on this one because they do In a Lonely Place. Deftones Teething, which was on Adrenaline. And there's a band called Pet, who are absolutely amazing, but no one in the universe has heard of them. They're actually they were signed to Tori Amos's record label, and they were the only band on that label. And It was a band formed by Tyler Bates, who does absolutely loads of soundtracks now. Tyler Bates and Lisa Papineau, I think it's pronounced. And I mean, Tyler Bates these days, he's done like Sucker Punch and 300 and the Halloween remakes and stuff like that. I think he did he do the Watchmen soundtrack for the score? I think he was involved in that.
Sounds about right. Yeah, I definitely know for 300 because I know, and I said on another podcast, I think that everyone was like super pissed because the Nine Inch Nails song wasn't on that soundtrack and it wasn't with the score, and everyone's like, "This is a bait and switch. Who is this Tyler Bates person?" But like, it's still an amazing soundtrack. It just wasn't what people were looking for.
But yeah, he also did Watchmen. He did Watchmen the movie.
Yeah.
Yes. Pet are amazing. They only had one album, and it is definitely worth checking out because it's one of my favourite albums of the 90s. It's sort of Riot Girly type indie rock, and yeah, if you dig stuff like Hole and Bikini Kill and stuff like that, it's definitely, but a bit more melodic. It is definitely worth listening to.
Did you know that Sunny Day Real Estate was asked to record a song for the City of Angels soundtrack?
No, but it doesn't surprise me.
So they recorded a song. They didn't accept it for whatever reason. They passed on it. So Sunny Day Real Estate renamed the song to Bucket of Chicken.
Right.
And they released it as a B-side.
Well, I don't know what the original song title was, but I don't think you can beat Bucket of Chicken. So I'm all for it.
Yeah. I also am all for a bucket of chicken. That'd be great. Also, Rollins' band Ghost Rider on the Crow soundtrack is brilliant. It's the first time I'd heard anything by Suicide, so obviously it was a cover of their track. But it's weird because obviously it keeps the main sort of melody and lyrics and structure, but Suicide, it's played on synthesizers, but he's played at a totally different tempo. Rollins' band has sort of really slowed it down, so it's grooving, and they've got like loads of wah guitar, like wah pedals drenched on all the guitars, and that's the song that's been stuck in my head all week for this one.
And it's a reference to a Marvel superhero.
It is, but Henry Rollins does not care about the Marvel superhero at all. He got asked about it and he was like, no, I just wanted to cover a Suicide song. Don't really know about that guy. Isn't he quite angry?
And then ironically is used for a different comic book, like hero, anti-hero,
Yeah.
like The Crow. So it's all kinds of like mix up there.
There's a lot of similarities, though, between The Crow and Ghost Rider, because it's a very dark, revenge sort of based superhero, isn't it?
Yeah, also the Punisher a little bit too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the main difference between Ghost Rider and the Punisher and the Crow is that the Crow is a lot less, liked by right wing arseholes.
Again, it's a little bit more on the obscure side, like Ghost Rider and Punisher have had like more mainstream moments. I'm not saying successful mainstream moments, but have definitely been into the public more, I would say.
Yeah. I can't get over a guy with makeup on. That's probably what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the main difference. Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, yeah, no, they didn't. For all of the remakes that I've seen, they've kind of kept it pretty normal for the wardrobe for the other ones.
Yeah.
I mean, Ghost Rider is a skull with flames, but he's not really wearing makeup, I guess.
Well, if he was, it would have melted along with his face.
Right.
Right.
I've not mentioned yet that My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult are basically diet ministry yet. That needs mentioning. They're like, have you got ministry? No. Will My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult do? Oh, I suppose so. It's fine, but it's not as good as ministry. And
I guess they've opened for ministry.
Yeah.
Or they've toured with ministry. Yeah.
Yeah, you can tell from the sound, absolutely, that they're very much the Psalm 69 era ministry is their biggest influence at that point, definitely. But some of the guitars sound really thin on it compared to actual ministry. And what do you guys think of the Jane Siberry track? The last It Can't Rain All the Time, the final track on there.
What do I think of that song? Yeah.
Yeah. I think the verses are okay. Then I really like the bridge where it's leading up to the chorus and it's sort of building. And then it's like she trips over and completely stacks it for the chorus because she's singing in a key that she cannot sing in. It's like she completely she's just slightly too flat on all of the notes in it and it completely ruins the song. So, yeah, I always skip that one. Well, I don't need to skip it. It's the last track on the album. Just listen to the Medicine and Cocteau Twins track and end it there. On vinyl, the vinyl version I've got there's 3 sides and then the last side's etched, and it's basically the first record is the one that goes on. I don't always go as far as side C because that's just My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult, Jesus and Mary Chain, Medicine, and Jane Siberry. So it's definitely the lesser tracks on there.
Yeah, it's a very front-loaded soundtrack.
Absolutely, yeah. It's sort of, I mean, you guys might not see it as unusual because you're a bit more soundtrack oriented than me, but I always had this impression that you got loads of. It's the whole music from and inspired by thing, where you get loads of tracks on soundtracks that aren't in the film. Every single one on this soundtrack is used in the film, which I perceived as unusual. I'm not sure if it necessarily is, but I definitely had loads of soundtrack albums with stuff that wasn't in the film anywhere and was just sort of, let's put these extra tracks on to try and get people to buy it.
Yeah, the 90s is definitely guilty of the inspired by, let's just pump this soundtrack full of songs that we just want to sell records.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's not weird to me because I'm not saying it's great, but I mean, I get it. It makes sense, right? It's logical. Like, you need to flesh out the soundtrack with a few more tracks. You want to put some people on there that'll make people buy it. It's all inspired by money. That makes sense to me. What's weird to me is when you have clear parts of songs in the movie that are then not on the soundtrack, which again is money. It's like, you can't like further license it to be on the soundtrack. It's just
I was
weird.
going to say it's licensing, isn't it, that one?
Yeah. Again, it always comes down to money, but it's like, that's weirder to me. Cause for me, it's like, oh, well, if there's a song that's inspired by and it's on there, bonus, right? As long as it fits with the theme. But then when you have a whole song that's in a film and you're like, oh, I really like the song, love how it's used, it should be on the soundtrack. Like, that's what's like to me.
Yeah, I can dig that, definitely. The thing with inspired by, I always find it really funny if there's a song like that. You've got a soundtrack album that's got some songs from years before the film came out, and they're like, yes, this is inspired by it. Are you sure? Have they got a time machine? Or are you talking utter bollocks?
It's called, we have 74 minutes that we can fill, so we're going to fill it. So
absolutely,
people will buy it. I mean, I know that this is the most popular version of the film, and it's the most popular version of the soundtrack, obviously.
Yeah.
But you can only find this soundtrack album on Spotify. You can't find the other.
Yes.
You can't find the sequels, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah. I think that
money.
Basically they've not stayed in the public consciousness enough for them to bother licensing those extra tracks. Like on City of Angels, there's various tracks on there, so someone's made a playlist on Spotify, but there's loads of stuff missing, like Korn, Sean Olsen, which was the B-side to No Place to Hide. That isn't on Spotify, so that's not on there, which is a shame because it's actually one of Korn's better songs. Because a lot of their, well, I say their early stuff because I've only listened to their. I was a big Korn fan for the first 3 records, and I re-listened to them a couple of years ago, and maybe about 10-15% of it holds up, and the rest of it is just like, why was I listening to this shite?
Yeah, and I think that's one of those like genres like Korn and similar bands where another one of those things were like at the time very popular. Everyone listened to it, myself included. But now looking back, I was like, wow, this is not the same as, 9 Inch Nails having a moment in the 90s and totally holds up. Like,
well, there's some that do. I mean, surprisingly, Limp Bizkit, a lot of the first Limp Bizkit album, $3 Bill Y'all, is actually really good. And it's fun to listen to. There's maybe sort of 1 or 2 really, really bad tracks on there, but Korn, it's like the bad tracks definitely outnumber the good tracks.
Yeah, it was a weird time for music when it was like pre-lumberjack rock. You had like Godsmack and like all of those bands were like hugely popular, hugely mainstream, and then we all just kind of woke up and were like, oh man, no.
Does the jungle scatting still hold up?
On Korn, it's sort of, it's part of the character of the songs. You wouldn't expect anyone else to do it, but "Freak on the Leash" is one of the songs that's still quite good, and that still gets, the few times I've been to rock clubs recently, that still gets played. So when I say recently, I mean in like the last decade. But that tends to still get played, and I think that holds up a bit. But yeah, some of the other songs, not so much.
Yeah, I feel like that's the only song like when they were at their height where I like understood why people liked Korn.
Oh, Blind is amazing. First track off their first album it's a completely new sound, and listening to it, there was you'd got there were elements of new metal that had come about before, like Rage Against the Machine were not a new metal band, but they were like a predecessor. Faith No More were not a new metal band, but they were a predecessor. But then Korn is where it sort of coalesced into this new thing, and it completely blew our minds at the time, which is why, when it was on the second Crow soundtrack, Sean Olsen was, one of the tracks that we sort of gravitated towards more. But this is pre-new metal at this point, because the first Crow record, first Crow movie was 1994, which was the same year that the first Korn record came out. So this is earlier than the new metal stuff, which is why you got nothing on there that fits in with that. Pantera, the Badges, the closest one. That's a Poison Idea cover, so that's pretty much straight hardcore.
Right.
The sample at the start from another movie as well. It's from Taxi Driver. That little sample at the start of the Badge, which is the exact same sample that Poison Idea used. So they've done it as a really straight cover. Yeah, they're the only band on the Crow soundtrack that I've actually sung live with, because I got the years ago at a Pantera gig. I was right in the front row and got a microphone thrown at me, so sang the second half of Walk.
Wow.
Now
So
that's
that was
a
pretty
story.
awesome.
Yeah, that is a great story.
And thankfully, Phil Anselmo wasn't being a racist Nazi arsehole at that gig. That was later. But yeah, going back to The Cure, with it being my absolute favourite Cure song, it's sort of like a sequel to The Hanging Garden, because there's lyrical references in there. In The Hanging Garden, it says, "In the heat of the night, the animals scream," and then the chorus of that says, like, "Scream, the animals scream." But you've also got there's elements of Disintegration in there as well, which is one of my other favourite Cure songs, because you've got this there's an effect in there that's like a pattern tremolo. So it's you've got the guitars and keyboards are played through a it's like a noise gate, which, for people that don't know what that is, it cuts the sound off and opens the sound up. So it's sort of like a stop-start kind of sound, where it's going from silent to the full guitar sound. And it's like a pattern version of that. So there's like a rhythm to it, rather than it just being straight, same note length for everything. Trying to simplify that for non-guitar nerds, and hopefully that makes sense. But if not, sorry. But yeah, they use that on Disintegration as well, although it's really subtle. It's a bit less subtle on Burn. There's also, when you look at sort of you've got various like websites like Songfacts and stuff, and they all tell you that The Cure have never played Burn live, which was true until November 2013. And since then, they've played it 108 times, and I've seen them do it twice. And it was amazing both times.
Wow.
And you know when it's going to happen, because you see Robert Smith get his, he's got a little penny whistle that he plays the sort of weird seagull-y type noises at the start.
Wow, to have a song sitting on the shelf for 20 years.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
There
must be a story behind that.
Well, I believe what had happened is it wasn't written with a full band. It was just Robert Smith and the drummer, Boris Williams. And then Boris Williams left the band not long after it was recorded. So none of the rest of the band obviously knew how to play it, so wouldn't have brought up, why don't we do this one, or anything like that. and Robert Smith had apparently forgotten how the song went until somebody reminded him and was like, "No, you should really do that live. It's amazing." And they played it for the first time at a festival somewhere in 2013, and it went down really well. So they've played it loads since then. Seems to get played a lot outdoors because they both times I've seen them do it, it was Hyde Park in London, and then they did a gig in Glasgow the year before the pandemic. And yeah, both times were brilliant. I'll see if they do it again in December when I see them at Birmingham NEC.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
I actually haven't seen The Cure yet. I think they're on my list.
Oh, they're amazing. I actually got engaged to my wife during a Cure gig at Hammersmith Apollo.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
Yeah.
So now we know why it's your favorite band.
Yeah, well, they were my favourite band before that.
Yeah, but that's like the extra 15%.
Well, that's why he proposed during his favorite band set.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, they can't be surpassed now, right? Like,
Well,
now it has
yeah,
the extra sentimental value.
They can't be surpassed because they wrote Disintegration in 1989, which is the greatest album of all time. And then they wrote Burn in 1994, which is a better song than anything on there. So, yeah. They basically can't be surpassed because they're amazing, but 9 Inch Nails and Mogwai are pretty much up there.
Well, thanks, Colin, for coming on the podcast.
Anytime. I've enjoyed that. That was fun.
It's been a lot of fun. Yeah, definitely. I also want to call out, I totally misspoke earlier. I said Pitchfork. I don't even know why. I meant Kerrang, and then you said Kerrang after, and I was like, I meant Kerrang.
I did think that, and I was thinking, Pitchfork's American, but I'm not going to say that.
Yeah, no, it is. I don't know why that came into my head.
Yeah, I was like, I didn't know Pitchfork made physical copies. So
no, I
there's
think
a UK
the exclamation point after Kerrang, it looks like a pitchfork. I don't know. My brain's broken. But then you said it, and I was like, that's what I meant. I had the physical copies, like stacks and stacks of Kerrang.
I suppose if you hit somebody with a pitchfork, it might make a sound like Kerrang! Possibly.
Oh, that's good.
Could
nice.
be.
Thank you for making my brain make sense.
That's all right. Anytime.
You can check out Free with this month's issue on all podcast platforms. They do an episode every month.
We do. And We Dig Music as well, which is our other podcast, where we sort of, at the moment, it's a different year each month, and we choose 10 songs from it and then fight over which of those songs are the best. And it's usually one of mine, because obviously I choose the best music. We Dig Music is on Twitter at We Dig Music PCast, and I believe it is on Instagram as... You can tell I'm just looking this up on my phone at the moment because I have no memory whatsoever. We Dig Music PCast on Instagram as well. Wow, some consistency. That doesn't normally happen.
Funny how that works out.
Yeah, but they're all on our website, which is wedigpodcasts.com as well. So both podcasts can be found on there. Or, like you said, wherever you get podcasts. Because people are listening to a podcast at the moment, so they know how to find them.
That's true. And if you want to support our podcast, you can find us on Instagram at SoundtrackCast and on Twitter at soundtrack_your. And if you'd like to financially support us, buymeacoffee.com/soundtrackcast, or you can give us a review on whatever platform you're using, and we'd really appreciate it. Thank you again, Colin. This was a lot of fun, and we should do it again.
Thanks for having me. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us this week on Soundtrack Your Life. Make sure to visit our website, soundtrackyourlife.net, where you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too.